Do you know that semiconductor is the most manufactured device in history with an approximate figure of 13 sextillion MOSFETs, which are the most prominent type of semiconductor? That is 14 more zeros in front of a crore or 15 more zeros in a million. Imagine the scale of manufacturing the semiconductors have had. The irony in this though is that semiconductors are still facing shortages in spite of these large scale of manufacturing. I know, you must be like, how, why, what? And that's what our video today is going to be all about. Semiconductors are all around us. We are literally surrounded by them. Your phone, car, microwave, laptop, you name a device with an integrated circuit or a machine that makes tasks easy for you, and you have a semiconductor. So today, realizing the importance of the semiconductor, we are going to be addressing three major questions. 1. Why is there a semiconductor chip shortage on a global scale? 2. How is it impacting the economies of the world? And 3. What is the state of semiconductor industry in India right now? The obvious answer to why there is a chip shortage would be that yes, the pandemic kicked in, and yes, the pandemic stalled the production of the semiconductor chips in the manufacturing facilities, and thus bottlenecks were prevalent all throughout the supply chains. Not only this, the manufacturing tools necessary in the production are also unavailable, limiting the chips fabrication facility. But what is the other most significant reason which is pulling the string for these shortages in the hindsight? All over the world, the semiconductor chip making fabrication units are available, be it in small or big numbers. Even India has its own fabrication unit for producing these chips. The issue persisting here is not with the number of fabrication labs or the capacity of these labs or the scale of these labs. The looming problem is that as the technology is advancing, these semiconductor chips are becoming smaller and smaller every year, with just a countable number of atoms now existing in the most advanced semiconductor chips. As these chips become smaller, the economies of scale come into play, along with the major concern arising from the quantum effects, which can change the properties of the nano-sized semiconductors in terms of magnetic, electrical and optical properties. Since the technical perspective is so complex at this nanoscale, the manufacturing of such fabrication units also require upwards of $10 billion to make them possible in the first place, which is why there are only a handful number of fabs in the world. And Taiwan, along with Korea and Japan, leads in the production. So the fabs are too expensive to set up. But I know the question you are pondering over. What about India and its semiconductor status? Wasn't this video about that, Damini? Yes, the video is. And now since we have some background about the semiconductor industry and its scenario on a global level, let's look at what does India stand for it. India certainly has realized the importance of these integrated circuits and cannot overstate the relevance these microchips hold.
It is our collective aim to establish India as one of the key partners in global semiconductor supply chains.
India's consumption of semiconductor chips is expected to cross $80 billion by 2026 and to $110 billion by 2030. This will pertain to India's share in the pie of electronics manufacturing to elevate from 3.5% to 10% in just a matter of 5 years. But, only if we have the semiconductor fabs ready. Why did I add these three buts in the last sentence? Well, that is the optimistic hopefulness with which Indian government is projecting the numbers. and the manufacturing scenario right now is in a very nascent stage. The government, although is doing its level best to make all these big numbers possible, but then the hurdles are numerous. India needs experience of developing small chips to extract the big players in the semiconductor business. Although the government recognizes the urgency and the technological implications of the lack of advanced IC fabs, they certainly took steps in the right direction by approaching the big players such as TSMC, Samsung, and Intel to set up the fabs in India. But then the efforts fell in the right place a little too late, as these tech giants had already made commitments with the advanced economies like US, Japan, and Germany. So the only viable option is to select from the players who are interested in making the most out of this technology buzz, and thus laying the foundation at least for this gargantuan business. So we know that the government of India is bullish on the semiconductor market. Now the next question arises that what is that India is actually doing to make the semiconductor dream a reality? Well, there's a lot actually. As a first step, India recently announced a $10 billion India Semiconductor Mission under the aegis of Ministry of Electronics and IT, which in itself is a resounding statement of intent by the government to gain a foothold in the $553 billion global semiconductor market. ISM, as its main objective, plans to develop a whole ecosystem of semiconductor electronics, which would include at least one fabrication advanced nanotech based fab unit, 2 display fabs, and fabs for compound semiconductors, photonics, and sensors. There are also schemes to promote upstream activities such as OSAT, which is Outsourced Semiconductor Assembly and Test, and the ATMP, that is Assembly, Testing, Marking and Packaging along with chip design. There are also efforts to catalyze industry and academia and to bring in a talent pool of more than 80,000 trained semiconductor professionals needed by the industry at all skill levels, from technicians to researchers. As a second step, the government has also rolled out a production linked incentive program, which we discussed about in the last video as well. If you haven't checked out the video yet, I will place the link for that in the description below. To put in short, the PLI program will provide financial assistance to the organizations for the incremental production volume of the products on a year-on-year basis, which will attract more companies to invest in setting up manufacturing in India, and thus these financial benefits could trickle down to the consumers in the form of lower, more affordable goods. As a third step, government is in process of finalizing the vendor for the setup of the advanced nanotech fabrication unit with 5 probable contenders already in the race. Big names like Vedanta Group, in collaboration with Foxconn, have devised an outlay of $20 billion. Foxconn, remember, the company which is producing iPhones currently in India. The Tatas, with their focus on the OSAT and ATMP units, are going to be involved in the testing and the packaging of semiconductors, while ISMC, a joint venture between Abu Dhabi based Next Orbit Ventures and Israel Star Semiconductor, has announced that it has signed a memorandum of understanding with the Karnataka government to set up a semiconductor chip manufacturing plant as well. All in all, India is on track and poised to become a major semiconductor manufacturer, consumer, supplier, and a packaging hub for the future world. This is not only going to shape but instead totally disrupt the electronics manufacturing in India, and will in turn provide technology for us at a more affordable prices, like in the US and Europe, and elevate the whole economy for us Indians. For the time being, let's keep our hopes high and convey our best wishes to the Government of India in evolving into a semiconductor superpower. See you all next week with another mindful video. Take care, and as Bachchan Sahab says, Shabak Khair.